I moved to the desert to escape everything. Noise, failure, people. But then she showed up. A glowing, silver-skinned alien who says I've triggered something inside her. Something biological. Now she's burning up, trembling in my arms, whispering that only my presence, my touch, can stabilize her. If I walk away, she could spiral. If I stay, I might never be the same. She says our bond wasn't an accident. She says we're resonating. And every time I touch her, I start to believe it. Back-end index pointing right. If you love romantic sci-fi stories with heat, heart, and aliens in mating season, subscribe now. You don't want to miss what happens next. The sun didn't rise in the Nevada desert. It clawed its way over the horizon, painting the dunes in a relentless gold that burned through your eyelids. Elliot Kane squinted through the cracked windshield of his beat-up van, the engine groaning like it shared his exhaustion. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt dissolving into heat haze, flanked by cacti that stood like silent sentinels guarding secrets no one cared to know. He'd been driving for hours, the radio spitting static and half-forgotten country tunes, each mile pulling him deeper in nowhere. This was it, his grand escape. Or maybe his surrender. At 34, Elliot had pictured his life with a bit more something. Fame, maybe. Or at least a gig that didn't end with drunk hecklers throwing beer cans. Instead, he was here, chasing a $700 a month duplex in the middle of the Mojave, a place so remote it felt like the edge of the world. The van rattled past a faded sign. Welcome to Dust Haven, NV. Population, not enough. He snorted. Fitting. He muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse. The desert didn't answer. It never did. The duplex came into view like a mirage, a squat, beige relic with peeling paint and a roof that sagged like it was tired of holding up the sky. Elliot parked, killed the engine, and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled of baked earth and creosote, sharp and unforgiving. He stretched, joints popping, and took in his new home. 2 units side by side, separated by a flimsy fence, with a single scraggly mesquite tree leaning like it was trying to escape. Well, he said to no one, here's to rock bottom. The words hung heavy, but he forced a grin. If he didn't laugh, he'd cry, and he'd promised himself no more of that. Inside, the duplex was worse than the photos. The living room smelled of mildew and regret, with a carpet stained in patterns that told stories he didn't want to hear. The kitchen had a sink that dripped like a metronome, each plink echoing in the emptiness. Elliot dropped his duffel bag, the thud swallowed by the silence. He wandered to the window, peering at the endless dunes. You wanted quiet, he told himself. You got it. But quiet wasn't peace. It was a mirror, forcing him to face the man he'd become, a musician who hadn't written a decent song in years, a dreamer who'd run out of dreams. He thought of the last gig, 6 months ago in a dive bar in Reno. The crowd had been half asleep, the amp had fritzed, and his one original song, a ballad about lost love, had landed like a brick. Stick to covers, kid, the manager had said, not unkindly. Elliot had packed his guitar and left, the rejection stinging worse than the cheap whiskey. Since then, he'd scraped by on freelance jingles for toothpaste ads, each note a compromise. But the money had dried up, and so had his hope. This duplex, this desert. It was his last shot to find something, a melody, a reason, anything. He shook off the memory and headed back to the van. The heat pressed against him, a physical thing, as he hauled out the first box, labeled studio junk in his sloppy scrawl. Guitar, cables, a battered notebook of half-finished lyrics. His life packed into cardboard. He was wrestling with his second box when a shadow moved across the yard. Not a cloud. There wasn't a cloud for miles, but a figure stepping out from the other unit's door. Hey there. The voice hit him like a cool breeze, smooth and warm, with an edge he couldn't place. Elliot turned, nearly dropping the box, and froze. The woman standing by the fence was unreal. Tall, with curves that seemed to defy gravity. She wore a loose blouse and denim shorts that left her long legs bare to the sun. Her skin shimmered, not with sweat but with a faint silver glow, like moonlight caught in a prism. Her hair, black as a midnight sky, cascaded past her shoulders, each strand catching the light like it was woven from stars. And her eyes, God, her eyes, were deep, electric blue, piercing and curious, locking onto him with an intensity that made his throat go dry. Hi, Elliot managed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. He set the box down, wiping sweaty palms on his jeans. You must be the neighbor. She glided. There was no other word for it. Across the yard, her movements fluid, almost too perfect. I'm Lirien Vara, she said, extending a hand. Her accent was strange, not quite foreign, but not quite anything else, either, like she'd learned English from a book and added her own melody. Up close, her skin was even more striking, smooth and cool, with that silver sheen that seemed to shift under the sun. He took her hand, and the contact sent a jolt through him, not painful but electric, like touching a live wire wrapped in silk. Elliot Kane, he said, shaking her hand a beat too long. He let go, flustered, and gestured at the van. Just moving in, trying not to melt out here. Her lips curved, not quite a smile but close, as if she was testing the expression. The thermal conditions are challenging, she said, her eyes scanning him like she was cataloging every detail. I observed your arrival. You are relocating to pursue. She tilted her head, waiting. Music, he said, then winced. It sounded pathetic out loud. I mean, I'm a musician, or I was, trying to get back to it. Write some songs, maybe find my spark again. He shrugged, feeling exposed under her gaze. What about you? What brings you to Dust Haven? He waved at the desolate surroundings, half expecting her to laugh. Research, she said simply, her tone clipped, like she was guarding a secret. I study ecological systems. The desert is a unique environment. She paused, then added, You are carrying musical instruments. May I see? He blinked. Sure, why not? He opened the box, pulling out his old acoustic guitar, its wood scratched but warm under his fingers. This is my baby. Been with me through every bad gig and worst breakup. Lirien leaned closer, her eyes widening with a childlike curiosity that caught him off guard. She reached out, then hesitated, glancing at him for permission. He nodded, and she traced a finger along the guitar's neck, her touch so light it barely registered. A device for harmonic resonance, she murmured, almost to herself. Fascinating. How does it sing? Elliot chuckled, the sound easing the knot in his chest. It doesn't sing on its own. You gotta coax it. Like this. He strummed a soft chord, the notes rolling out into the dry air, simple but clear. Lirien's face lit up, her lips parting in a way that made his pulse skip. It produces structured vibrations, she said, her voice tinged with wonder. Does it evoke emotional responses in your species? He laughed outright. Yeah, you could say that. It's supposed to make people feel something. Love, pain, hope. Depends on the song. He strummed again, a minor chord this time, letting it linger. What do you think? She tilted her head again, studying the guitar like it held the secrets of the universe. I think it is a powerful tool. Perhaps it can make a heart. What is the term? Melt. Elliot grinned, caught off guard by her earnestness. You're not wrong. Keep talking like that, and you'll melt mine. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and he cringed, expecting her to back off. But Lirien just looked at him, her blue eyes unreadable, then said, I will consider this effect. She stepped back, gesturing to his boxes. You require assistance? He nodded, grateful for the change of subject. If you're offering, I'm not saying no. They worked together, hauling boxes from the van to the duplex, the sun beating down like a judgmental spotlight. Lirien lifted heavy crates with an ease that surprised him, her movements precise, almost mechanical. She paused over a small speaker, turning it in her hands like it was an artifact from another world. What is this? She asked, her brow furrowing. A Bluetooth speaker, Elliot said, biting back a smile. Plays music, for when you want to dance under the stars, or whatever. A device for sonic transmission, she said, nodding gravely. Your culture values auditory stimulation. He couldn't help it. He laughed again. You make it sound like we're lab rats. Yeah, we like music. Keeps us sane. He plugged the speaker into his phone and hit play, letting a soft indie track spill out, the melody weaving through the desert air. Lirien froze, her eyes locked on the speaker, as if it was speaking to her. "This resonates," she said softly, and for a moment, her guard slipped, revealing something raw, almost vulnerable. Then she straightened, handing him the speaker. "I should not delay your relocation, but I am pleased to meet you, Elliot Kane." "Likewise, Lirien Vara," he said, tried her name on his tongue. It felt like a lyric, one he wanted to sing again. They carried the last box inside, and as she turned to leave, her shoulder brushed his. The contact was fleeting, but it hit like a spark, her skin cool, smooth, like polished stone kissed by moonlight. His breath caught, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the desert heat. He glanced at her, half expecting her to notice, but she was already walking away, her hair swaying like a dark tide. "See you around," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. She paused at her door, glancing back. "I anticipate further interactions," she said, and then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Elliot stood there, the speaker still humming softly in his hand. The desert stretched out, vast and silent, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. He didn't know what Lirien was, botanist, eccentric, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing. She was a mystery, and he was already hooked. He strummed his guitar once more, a single note rising into the dusk, and whispered to himself, "Here's to new beginnings." Somewhere in the distance, the desert seemed to hum back. The desert didn't care about mornings. It woke up grumpy, shoving heat through the cracked blinds of Elliot Kane's new duplex like an unwelcome guest. He groaned, rolling off the lumpy mattress he dragged him last night, the springs creaking in protest. His phone blinked 7:13 a.m., but time felt meaningless out here, just another number swallowed by the dunes. He shuffled to the kitchen, the linoleum cool against his bare feet, and fumbled with a chipped mug. Coffee. Step one to pretending he had a plan. He set up shop in the living room, guitar propped against the wall, notebook splayed open on a wobbly table. The silence was deafening, pressing against his ears like a challenge. "All right, dessert," he muttered, picking up the guitar. "Let's see what you've got." His fingers danced over the strings, coaxing out a melody, soft at first, then jagged like the horizon outside. But it faltered, notes tumbling into dissonance. "Come on," he growled, strumming harder. "Give me something." The sound echoed off the bare walls, hollow and thin, like his own voice calling back. It wasn't a song. It was noise. He dropped the guitar onto its stand with a sigh, the wood clattering like a disappointed friend. "Missing a soul?" "Huh," he said to it, half expecting an answer. Nothing. Just the drip of the sink, relentless as ever. He tried again, scribbling lyrics in the notebook. Dust in my lungs, echoes in my veins, but crossed them out. Too bleak, too real. The desert was supposed to inspire him, not bury him alive. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling where a water stain bloomed like a bad omen. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he should have stayed in Reno, scraping by on toothpaste jingles instead of chasing ghosts out here. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of the spiral. Mia's name flashed on the screen, and he hit accept, bracing himself. Elliot Kane, Desert Hermit. Her voice crackled through, sharp and teasing. "You still alive out there? Or have the coyotes claimed you?" He smirked, the familiarity easing the ache in his chest. "Barely. The coffee's keeping me going. How's civilization? Overrated. You'd hate it. People everywhere, no sand in sight." She laughed, then softened. "Seriously, how's it going? Found your muse yet?" He glanced at the guitar, its strings glinting accusingly. "Not unless my muse is a leaky faucet. I'm trying, Mia. It's just quiet. Too quiet. That's what you wanted, right? A blank slate?" She paused, and he could picture her twirling her hair, skeptical. "Or are you just hiding from the world again?" "Ouch," he said, but she wasn't wrong. Maybe a little of both. "How about time? No gigs to bomb, no rent due for a month. I'll figure it out." "You better," she said. "I'm not driving out there to drag your ass back. Call me when you write something worth hearing." She hung up, leaving him with a grin and a pang of loneliness. Mia knew him too well, knew he'd run out here to escape, not just to create. But damn it, he wanted to prove her wrong. He grabbed the guitar again, determined, when a shadow flickered past the window. It was Lirien, out in the shared yard, crouched over a scruffy patch of dirt. She held something in her hands, a sleek, glowing device, its light pulsing green against the cactus like it was scanning for secrets. Elliot watched, transfixed, as she moved with that eerie grace, her silver skin catching the sun in faint, shimmering waves. What was she doing? He stepped outside, the heat slamming into him, and called, "Morning. You, talking to plants or what?" She straightened, turning those electric blue eyes on him, and he felt a jolt, like she'd plugged him into something alive. "Good cycle, Elliot Kane," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I am analyzing the photosynthetic capacity of this organism. Would you like to observe?" He blinked, then laughed. "You're serious?" "Sure, why not? Beats arguing with my guitar." He crossed the yard, boots crunching gravel, and leaned in as she aimed the device again. A tiny screen flickered with numbers and graphs he couldn't read. "So what? You're a botanist? Or are you planning to beam that cactus up to space?" Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Space is not my current objective. I study resilience, how life adapts to extremes." She tilted her head, studying him now. "You adapt through sound. Yes? Your music?" He shrugged, caught off guard by the shift. "Trying to. Not much luck yet. The desert's stingy with inspiration." "Perhaps it requires a different frequency," she said, and he couldn't tell if she was joking. Before he could respond, she stood, brushing dirt off her shorts. "I have prepared sustenance. Will you join me?" "Sustenance?" He grinned. "You mean food?" "Yeah, I'm in." He followed her to her unit, the door creaking open to reveal a space unlike his, a jungle of potted plants, some glowing faintly, others curling like they were alive. It smelled of earth and something metallic, sharp against the desert's dryness. She gestured to a small table where a pot simmered, steam curling up in silvery wisps. "Dinner," she announced, ladling a greenish broth into bowls. It looked like pond water with a sci-fi twist, flecked with bits of something he hoped was edible. He took a cautious sip, the taste hitting him like mint fused with copper, strange but not bad. "This is unique," he said, swallowing. "What's it called?" "A nutritional synthesis," she replied, sitting across from him, her posture perfect. "Optimized for energy and cellular repair. Do you find it adequate?" He chuckled, the formality cracking him up. "Adequate? It's like drinking a spaceship's lunch. I like it, though. Beats my usual ramen." He took another sip, watching her over the rim. She ate with precision, each spoonful calculated, and he wondered what kind of life made someone so deliberate. "Tell me about your music," she said suddenly, her eyes locking onto his. "Why do you create it?" The question hit like a chord he hadn't played yet. Well, it's how I make sense of things. Love, loss, all that messy stuff. Plus, it's fun when it works." He grabbed his phone from his pocket, scrolling to a playlist. "Here, listen." He tapped play, and a gritty rock riff spilled out, raw and pulsing. Lirien tilted her head, her hair spilling like ink over her shoulder. "This rhythm," she said, her voice soft, analytical, "it accelerates your pulse, stimulates a physiological response." He laughed, caught by her seriousness. "Yeah, that's the idea. Gets the blood pumping, makes you feel alive." He tapped the table to the beat, grinning as she mimicked him, her fingers hesitant but precise. "You ever dance to stuff like this?" "Dance?" She frowned, like the word was a puzzle. "A physical expression of sound waves?" "Exactly." He stood, offering a hand. "Come on, I'll show you." She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing his palm. Light as a feather, cool as a breeze over strings. His heart stuttered, but he played it off, pulling her up. They swayed awkwardly to the fading riff, her movements stiff but curious, and he couldn't shake the feeling she was studying him as much as the music. The song ended, and they sat back down, the air between them humming. "So," he said, poking at the soup, "what's your deal? You're out here alone, cooking space soup, scanning cacti." You don't exactly scream small-town Nevada. She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. I am an observer, she said carefully. I learn from what I see. You are interesting to observe. He smirked, leaning back. Interesting, huh? I'll take it. Most people just call me a train wreck. Her eyes softened, just for a second, and he wondered if she caught the half-truth in his joke. Later, they cleaned up, standing side by side at her tiny sink. He scrubbed a bowl, passing it to her, and as she reached for it, his hand grazed her waist, just a brush, accidental, but it stopped him cold. Her skin was soft, impossibly smooth, like silk stretched over something alive, something strong. Heat flooded his face, a chaotic melody thumping in his skull. Sorry, he mumbled, stepping back, but her gaze pinned him. Your contact, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. It disrupts my data. It is notable. She held his eyes a beat too long, then turned away, leaving him staring at the sink, pulse racing. Back in his unit, he flopped onto the mattress, replaying the night. Lirien was a riddle, beautiful, strange, and way too smart for Dusthaven. He felt her watching him, not like a scientist with a specimen, but something else, something softer. Or was he imagining it? He grabbed his guitar, strumming a riff inspired by her voice, smooth, sharp, otherworldly. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Maybe the desert wasn't so stingy after all. He drifted off, the echo of her touch lingering like a note he couldn't shake. The night settled over Dusthaven like a heavy blanket, the kind that smothers rather than comforts. Elliot sat cross-legged on the floor of his duplex, guitar cradled in his lap, the strings humming under his fingers. The desert outside was a void, black and endless, save for the faint glow of stars piercing through the window. He plucked a slow, mournful tune, something about shadows and lost chances, letting the notes spill into the stillness. It wasn't great, but it was alive, and that felt like progress. The single bulb overhead flickered, casting jittery shadows across the stained walls, but he barely noticed. Until it didn't just flicker, it died. The room plunged into darkness, the silence roaring in his ears like a broken cord. The guitar's last note hung, then faded, swallowed by the void. You've got to be kidding me, Elliot muttered, setting the instrument aside with a clatter. He fumbled for his phone, the screen's glow cutting through the black like a lifeline. 10:47 p.m. The desert night stretched ahead, and now he was blind in it. He stood, the floor creaking under his socks, and shuffled toward the kitchen, where the fuse box hid behind a crooked panel. The air felt thicker, charged, as if the darkness itself was watching. He flipped open the panel, squinting at the ancient switches. Nothing looked blown, but then a pulse of light caught his eye, not from inside but outside. Through the window, a shimmering blue glow spilled from Lirien's unit, sharp and unnatural, like a lighthouse calling ships to ruin. It pulsed, steady as a heartbeat, cutting through the dune's gloom. What the hell? He breathed, pressing his face to the glass. The light wasn't a lamp or a TV. It was alive, moving, painting her side of the duplex in eerie hues. His pulse quickened, curiosity tugging him like a riff he couldn't shake. He thought of that gig in Reno, years back when the power cut mid-set. The crowd had jeered, the stage gone dark, and he'd stood there, guitar useless, humiliation burning hotter than the spotlight ever had. No one had helped, just laughed and left. That memory gnawed at him now, a sour note of vulnerability. Was this another failure waiting to mock him? Or something else? He grabbed a flashlight from his duffel, its beam weak but steady, and stepped into the night. The desert air bit at his skin, cold and dry, whispering secrets he couldn't hear. Whatever Lirien was up to, he needed to know. The gravel crunched under Elliot's boots as he crossed the yard, the flashlight's beam bouncing like a nervous rhythm. Lirien's door loomed ahead, the blue light seeping through the cracks, pulsing faster now, insistent. He raised a fist and knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the stillness. Lirien? You okay in there? No answer, just the hum of something electric, something alive. He knocked again, harder. Hey, the power's out. You got a generator or... The door swung open, and he froze. Lirien stood there, but she wasn't the Lirien he'd danced with. Her skin glowed, not just silver, but radiant, like molten metal poured over marble, shimmering with every breath. She wore a sleek, form-fitting suit, black and iridescent, hugging her curves like it was part of her. Her eyes, those electric blues, were wide, pupils dilated into dark pools, and her hair floated slightly, as if caught in an unseen current. She swayed, unsteady, gripping the frame, and Elliot's mouth went dry. She was beautiful, terrifyingly, impossibly beautiful. "Elliot," she rasped, her voice rougher, deeper, like it was fighting to stay steady. "You should not be here. Not now." Her chest heaved, each breath a struggle, and he saw it then. Fear, or something close, flickering in those endless eyes. He stepped closer, instinct overriding sense. "You look like hell. What's wrong?" She stumbled, and he caught her, hands landing on her arms. The contact hit him like a shockwave. Her skin was hot, feverish, thrumming with energy that buzzed through his palms. He slid a hand to her back to steady her, fingers brushing her spine, and it was like touching a live wire wrapped in velvet, scorching electric alive. His breath hitched, a jolt racing up his arm, settling low in his gut. "Jesus," he whispered, pulling back, but the heat lingered, a melody he couldn't unhear. She straightened, trembling, and fixed him with a look that pinned him to the spot. "This is unwise," she said, her words jagged. "My condition, it is not for you to witness." But her eyes told a different story. Conflict, need, something raw and unguarded. She gripped his sleeve, then let go, stepping back into the glow of her unit. The light pulsed behind her, casting her silhouette in sharp relief, and he saw it. Desperation, barely held together. "Lirien, talk to me," he said, voice low, urgent. "You're freaking me out. What's happening?" He didn't move, rooted by the strangeness, the pull of her gaze. She shook her head, a small, frantic motion, and he saw her hands clench, nails digging into her palms. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a power surge. It was her unraveling, and he couldn't look away. Lirien turned, staggering into her unit, and Elliot followed, the door clicking shut behind him. The room was a kaleidoscope of light, blue, green, violet, swirling from devices he couldn't name, their hum filling the air like a chorus. Plants glowed faintly in their pots, leaves curling toward the chaos. She sank onto a chair, head in her hands, and he knelt beside her, heart pounding. "Tell me what's going on," he said, softer now. "I'm not leaving till you do." She lifted her head, eyes locking onto his, and took a shuddering breath. "I'm not of this world, Elliot Kane," she said, each word deliberate, heavy. "I come from Altair, a system far beyond your stars. My kind, we are explorers, learners. I was sent to observe your planet, its resilience, its life." He stared, the words sinking in slow, like a song played backward. "Altair? You mean you're an alien?" His voice cracked, half laugh, half disbelief. She nodded, and he saw it then. The truth in her glow, her grace, her strangeness. "Holy shit," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I thought you were just weird. My home," she continued, her voice softening, "is a place of light and sound. Oceans that shimmer like liquid starfire, forests where trees sing with the wind. I carry it in me, always." Her eyes drifted, lost in memory, and he could almost hear it, the hum of a world he'd never know. She clenched her fists, glow intensifying. "But I am in a cycle, a biological imperative. Every decade, my body seeks harmony, a compatible frequency to stabilize it. Without it, I weaken. ED." She met his gaze, fierce and fragile. "You, Elliot, your resonance aligns with mine. I did not intend this." He rocked back, head spinning. "Me? You're saying I'm what? Your cosmic tuning fork." It sounded insane, but her eyes held no lie. "Am I dreaming this? Or did I finally lose it?" Elliot stood, pacing the glowing room, mind racing. An alien. A cycle. Him, the key. It was too much, too wild, but her trembling hands, her ragged breaths, they were real. He stopped, looking at her. "Okay," he said, voice steadying. "You need help. What do we do?" Lirien shook her head. "There is no we. I must endure alone or return to Altair." But her voice faltered, and he saw it. She didn't want to go. He thought of that Reno night, alone in the dark, no one there. He couldn't let her face this the same way. "No way," he said, crossing his arms. "You're staying here tonight. We'll figure it out." He grabbed a blanket from his unit, tossing it onto the sofa with a grin. "Hard or soft pillows? I'm guessing aliens have preferences too, right?" She blinked, startled, and he laughed, easing the tension. Inside, he was a mess, fear clawing at him. But her vulnerability hit harder. He'd been the one no one helped, and he wouldn't be that to her. "I'm not letting you crash alone," he said, softer. "Not like this." She rose slow and nodded. "Thank you, Elliot Kane," she whispered, her eyes softening, a thread of connection tightening between them. He turned away, heart thudding, wondering what he'd just stepped into, but knowing he couldn't step back. The desert sun crept through the blinds, softer this morning, as if it knew Elliot needed a break. He woke to the faint hum of Lirien's voice drifting from his living room, where she'd spent the night on his sagging sofa. He patted out in mismatched socks, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and found her sitting cross-legged, blanket draped over her shoulders like a cape. Her silver skin had dulled to a gentle shimmer, but those blue eyes still sparked, watching him with quiet intensity. "Morning," he croaked, voice rough from the night's chaos. "Sleep okay?" "Rest was sufficient," she said, her tone measured but warm. "Your fabric structure provided adequate support." She patted the sofa, and he chuckled, the sound easing the knot in his chest. "Glad to hear it." "Hungry." He shuffled to the kitchen, pulling out a loaf of bread and a toaster that looked like it had seen better decades. "Let's try something normal after last night's revelations." She followed, curious, and he grinned. "Ever had toast?" "Toasted grain." She tilted her head, hair spilling like ink. "A thermal alteration of carbohydrates." "Close enough." He popped 2 slices in, showing her the dials. "Watch and learn, Space Lady." The toaster whirred, and he handed her the butter. She mimicked him, spreading it with surgical precision, until the toast popped up, startling her. The knife slipped, and a glob of butter hit the counter. Then the toaster sparked, a tiny flame licking up. "Shit," Elliot yelped, grabbing a dish towel to smother it. Lirien lunged for a glass of water, splashing it everywhere, and the fire hissed out in a puff of smoke. They froze, staring at the soggy, charred mess, then burst out laughing. Her laugh a crystalline chime, his a rough bark. "Well," he wheezed, wiping his eyes, "that's one way to cook breakfast." She smiled, a real one this time, and he felt it like a chord striking true. He salvaged the surviving toast, and they ate standing up, crumbs dusting the counter. He flipped on his phone, jazz spilling out, smooth sax and lazy drums. Lirien's head tilted again, analytical. "This is a code of emotional waves," she said, tapping her fingers to the beat. "It resonates differently than your rock. Yeah, it's chill, like a hug from sound." He grinned, swaying exaggeratedly. "Makes me want to be a cosmic DJ, spinning tunes for the stars." "DJ," she echoed, testing the word. "A curator of vibrations?" "Exactly." He laughed, her earnestness melting something in him. "Stick with me. I'll teach you the whole playlist." Later, he suggested a walk to Dust Haven's excuse for a market, a cluster of stalls under faded awnings. The sun baked the sand as they strolled, Lirien's silver skin glinting under a wide hat she'd borrowed from him. She stopped at a fruit stand, picking up an orange, her eyes wide. "What is this?" "An orange," he said, peeling one to show her. "Juicy sweet. Try it." She held it like a treasure, sniffing it. "A spherical nutrient vessel," she declared, peeling it with care. Juice dripped down her fingers, and she licked it, her face lighting up. "This stimulates pleasure receptors." He smirked, biting into his own. "Told you. Earth's got some tricks up its sleeve." Watching her marvel at something so simple, he felt a tug, pride, maybe, or something deeper. That evening, Elliot convinced Lirien to hit Dusthaven's Lone Bar, a dusty joint with neon signs and a karaoke machine older than he was. The place smelled of beer and regret, but the crowd was lively, buzzing with locals escaping the desert's grip. He dragged her to a sticky table, grinning. "Time to show you how humans unwind." She scanned the room, curious. "This is a ritual of collective resonance." "Pretty much." He handed her the song list. "Pick one. I'll go first." He chose a rock anthem, all grit and swagger, and took the mic. The opening riff hit, and he belted it out, voice rough but alive, the crowd clapping along. For 3 minutes, he wasn't the guy who'd bombed in Reno. He was electric, unstoppable. When he finished, cheers erupted, and he flopped back beside her, breathless. "Your turn." Lirien hesitated, then stepped up, her presence silencing the chatter. She picked something unlabeled, and a haunting melody flowed. Her voice like waves crashing on stone, clear and alien, rising from her chest in a language he didn't know. The bar went still, every eye on her, the notes weaving a spell that felt ancient, vast. When she stopped, the silence held, then applause thundered. She returned, cheeks faintly flushed, and he stared, awestruck. "That was unreal." "Your kind responds to harmony," she said, almost shy. "I observed." "Damn right we do." He laughed, then the jukebox kicked in, a slow, sultry tune. "Dance with me." He pulled her up, and she followed, tentative. The floor was crowded, bodies swaying, and he guided her, hands finding her hips. Her skin pulsed under his fingers, warm and firm, like a rhythm he could play forever. "Feel the beat," he murmured, stepping closer. She mirrored him, her breath grazing his neck, light and hot, sending a shiver down his spine. "This proximity," she whispered, "it amplifies sensation." Her hands rested on his shoulders, and they moved together, the world blurring. His thumbs brushed her waist, tracing the curve, and his pulse hammered, a song only he could hear. She leaned in, eyes locked, and he forgot how to breathe. Back at the duplex, moonlight spilled through the windows as they sat on his floor, buzzed from the night. Lirien's glow was softer now, but her gaze held weight. "Elliot," she said, voice low, "I must tell you more. My purpose here, it is not only observation." He leaned forward, stomach tightening. "Go on." "I serve the Stellar Alliance," she said, "a coalition of worlds. Earth is young to them, untested. I study your species, your adaptability, your potential, to see if you are ready." "Ready for what?" His throat felt dry, the bar's warmth fading. "Contact. Inclusion." She paused, fingers tracing the blanket's edge. "My data suggests humanity is complex, resilient, yet fragile. My cycle, our compatibility, it complicates this. It could prove your kind capable of more than they believe." He rocked back, mind reeling. "So I'm evidence? A lab rat in your big experiment." The words stung, sharper than he meant, and he saw her flinch. "No," she said quickly, eyes searching his. "You are unexpected, significant." Her voice softened, and he caught it, a flicker of something personal, not scientific. "I did not plan to feel this resonance." He stared, caught between doubt and hope. Was he just a data point to her, a fluke in her alien equation? Or did those eyes, soft, unguarded, mean more? He wanted to believe it, but the fear gnawed. He'd been a failure before. What if he was nothing to her, too? A low hum split the air, and the room darkened as a ripple of light tore open beside them. A figure emerged, tall, broad, with skin like burnished steel and eyes glowing red as embers. "Lirien Vara," it intoned, voice grinding like metal on stone. "You have breached protocol." Elliot scrambled up, heart pounding. "Who the hell?" "Theric," Lirien said, standing, her glow flaring. "Overseer of my mission." She faced him, steady but tense. "I have not breached. I have adapted. Your cycle," Theric snapped, "binds you to this primitive. It is forbidden. You will return to Altair, and his memory will be erased." The red eyes fixed on Elliot, cold, unyielding. "No way." Elliot shot back, stepping forward. If she's a criminal, lock me up too. I'm not letting you take her. His voice shook, but he meant it, every damn word. Theric loomed closer, but Lirien moved between them, fierce. He is not primitive. He is vital. I will not leave him to your judgment. Her hand brushed Elliot's, a spark of defiance, and he felt it. Her choice, their fight. We stand together, she said, and Elliot nodded, fear burning into resolve. Whatever came next, they'd face it as one. The air in Lirien's unit buzzed like a live wire, thick with the hum of machines and the sharp tang of ozone. Elliot stood beside her, heart still pounding from Theric's metallic threat, the red-eyed shadow lingering in his mind like a bad riff he couldn't shake. The room glowed, a chaotic symphony of lights spilling from devices he couldn't name, screens that shimmered like liquid glass, rippling with star charts and symbols that danced beyond his grasp. Lirien moved with purpose, her silver skin flaring faintly as she tapped a console, her fingers swift and sure. We need his data, she said, voice taut, urgent. Theric's logs. They hold the proof of our resonance. If we can retrieve them, we can challenge his command. Elliot blinked, the words sinking in slow, like a melody he was still learning. Proof? You mean us? He gestured between them, the absurdity of it all bubbling up. You got a plan to steal from that walking steel trap? Yes. She turned, her blue eyes piercing through the haze of light. The Alliance values evidence. If we show our compatibility, biological, neural, it could redefine their view of your species. Of you. Her gaze softened, just for a beat, and he felt it, a thread pulling tighter between them. She waved a hand, and a screen flared to life, its surface flowing like water over stone. Constellations spun across it, alien and endless, pinpricks of light weaving patterns he'd never seen in Nevada's sky. This is my interface, she said, tracing a line of glowing runes. Theric's device syncs here when he reports. If we access it, she paused, hands hovering, and he saw the tension in her shoulders, the weight of defying her own kind. He stepped closer, peering at the screen, its glow painting his face in cool blues. Okay, so we're hacking an alien overlord. Cool. Totally normal Tuesday. He grinned, leaning against the console, and caught her eye. If this is your office, I seriously need to upgrade my studio. Mine's got a leaky sink and bad vibes. Yours has what interdimensional Wi-Fi? Lirien's lips twitched, a flicker of amusement breaking her focus. Your humor. It is a curious adaptation, she said, but her tone was lighter, like she was testing a smile. This is not Wi-Fi. It is a neural lattice, linking minds across systems. Like your music, but vaster. Vaster, he echoed, nodding like he got it. Sure. So how do we crack it? She guided his hand to a panel, her fingers brushing his cool, electric, a spark that made his breath hitch. The screen pulsed and data streamed, graphs spiking like sound waves. Here, she said, pointing, our interactions, your touch, your voice, they've altered me. My brainwaves sync with yours, a harmonic convergence. It's rare, significant. He stared at the jagged lines, a visual echo of every moment they'd shared. The soup, the dance, her trembling last night. So we're a duet. His voice was soft, half joking, but the truth of it hit him hard. She nodded, and he felt a swell, pride, fear, something he couldn't name. All right, he said, straightening. Let's grab this data and shove it in Theric's face. Or, his creepy eye sockets. She tapped again, and a holographic key flickered into view, a shard of light. His access code, she whispered. We take it, we run. There's a vessel in the shed, a scout craft. Small but swift. Her eyes met his, resolute. Are you with me? He grinned, adrenaline buzzing. All in, Lirien. Let's make some noise. The shed door groaned open, revealing a sleek, teardrop-shaped craft that gleamed like polished obsidian under the desert moon. Elliot barely had time to gawk before Lirien pulled him inside, the hatch sealing with a hiss. The interior was tight, curved walls pulsing with faint light, a single console glowing at the helm. She slid into the pilot's seat, hands flying over controls, and the craft hummed to life, a low vibration rumbling through his boots. "Hold on," she said, and before he could brace himself, they shot forward, the dunes blurring into streaks of silver outside the viewport. "Holy!" he yelped, gripping the wall as the craft wove between cacti, sand spraying like a wake. "You drive like a rock star." She didn't answer, focused, but a faint curve touched her lips. The craft banked hard, diving toward a jagged outcrop, a cave mouth yawning in the cliffs. They slipped inside, the walls closing in, and she cut the engines, the silence crashing over them like a dropped beat. Elliot exhaled, heart racing, and took in the cave. Crystals studded the walls, glinting like fallen stars, their light fracturing across the stone in a prism of blues and purples. "Where are we?" he asked, voice hushed, as if the place demanded it. "A refuge," Lirien said, stepping out beside him. "The crystals mask our signal. We have time." She clutched a small drive, the stolen data, her glow dimming with exhaustion. He saw it then, the toll of running, of choosing him. He reached for her hand, tentative, and she let him take it, her fingers trembling in his. "Lirien," he said, voice low, raw. "You okay?" Her eyes met his, wide and unguarded, and she stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to a breath. The crystals flared, their light pulsing with her nearness, and he felt it, her warmth, her pulse, a rhythm calling to his own. She squeezed his hand, her voice a whisper. "You are my dissonance and my harmony." Before he could process it, she leaned in, and their lips met, a collision soft but seismic, like a note held too long, trembling on the edge of breaking. The cave answered, crystals chiming faintly, their glow swelling as if tuned to their kiss. His hands found her face, her skin hot and alive, and the world dissolved into light and sound. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a tide pulling him under. Her breath mingled with his, sharp and sweet, and the crystals sang, a symphony rising around them. Their glow rippled, waves of color crashing like an ocean against the shore, washing over the stone in a dance older than words. He pulled her closer, her body pressing against his, and the air thickened, charged, as if the cave itself breathed with them. Her fingers tangled in his hair, and he tasted her, metal and starlight, a flavor he'd never forget. The light pulsed faster, mirroring his heartbeat, and he felt her shudder, a note of surrender in her grip. They broke apart, gasping, and he pressed his forehead to hers, dizzy. The crystals dimmed, their song fading to a hum, but the echo lingered in his bones. "You're the melody I want to memorize," he murmured, voice rough, and she smiled. A small, fragile thing that cracked him open. He didn't need words to know what had passed between them. Not just lips, but something deeper, a connection woven into the cave's glowing heart. She stepped back, clutching the drive, her glow steady now. "We must finish this," she said, but her eyes held his, promising more. He nodded, still reeling, the taste of her lingering like a song he'd play forever. The cave's crystalline hum faded as Lirien fired up the scout craft again, its engines purring like a low bass line cutting through the silence. Elliot braced himself against the wall, the glow of the crystals receding as they slipped back into the night. The viewport flared with silver, sand dunes rushing past in a blur, the craft slicing through the desert like a note carried on the wind. He watched, mesmerized, as the landscape streaked by, each curve and dip a fleeting melody under the moon's pale spotlight. "This thing moves," he said, voice tinged with awe, "like a song you can't catch up to." Lirien's hands danced over the controls, her silver skin glinting in the console's light, her focus razor-sharp. "Speed is our shield," she replied, voice steady despite the strain etched into her jaw. The craft tilted, skimming a dune's crest, and sand sprayed against the hull, a soft hiss blending with the engine's thrum. Elliot's stomach lurched, but he grinned, half terrified, half exhilarated, like the first time he played a crowd and felt it roar back. A sharp beep cut through the rhythm, and red lights flared on the console. Lirien's eyes narrowed. Patrol craft, she said, flicking a switch. They've traced us. Through the viewport, a shadow loomed. A sleek, angular ship, its hull glinting like a predator's teeth, closing fast. Elliot's pulse spiked. Can they catch us? He asked, gripping the edge of her seat. Not if I can help it, she muttered, yanking a lever. The craft banked hard, diving between two dunes, sand exploding around them like a drumroll gone wild. The patrol ship fired, a streak of light grazing their wing, the impact shuddering through the floor. Hold on, Lirien snapped, twisting the controls. The craft spun, threading a gap in the cliffs, so tight Elliot swore he felt stones scrape his skin. She wove through the maze, her movements fluid, precise, like a musician hitting every note in a solo no one else could play. The patrol ship lagged, its bulk struggling to follow, and she smirked, just a flicker, but he caught it. Show off, he said, breathless, and she shot him a glance that felt like a shared secret. The beeping slowed, then stopped, the red lights fading. They'd lost it, for now. Lirien eased the craft to a hover, the dunes stretching quiet beneath them, and exhaled, a tremble in her breath. Elliot reached for her hand, his fingers curling around hers, and felt it. The vibration beneath her skin, a subtle pulse like a song only he could hear. You're incredible, he said, voice low, rough with adrenaline and something deeper. Her grip tightened, her warmth seeping into him, and he felt the desert shrink away, leaving just them, two notes resonating in the dark. The craft settled in the cave's depths, crystals winking like an audience awaiting the finale. Lirien clutched the data drive, its light pulsing faintly, when a ripple tore through the air, a portal shimmering open with a crackle. A figure stepped out, tall and regal, her hair a cascade of molten gold that caught the cave's glow like liquid fire. Her eyes were sharp, cutting as a blade's edge, and her voice rang clear, commanding. Lirien Vara, she said, you have defied the Alliance. Explain yourself. Elliot stood beside Lirien, heart thudding, as she faced the newcomer. Velith, Lirien said, her tone firm but respectful. Chief Arbiter, I have not defied, I have discovered. She held up the drive, its light flaring. This is evidence, not rebellion. Velith's gaze flicked to Elliot, assessing, then back to Lirien. Your cycle binds you to this human. Theric deems it a violation. You risk erasure for this. Her words were ice, but curiosity glinted beneath them. Lirien stepped forward, plugging the drive into a wrist device. A hologram bloomed, swirling patterns of light, graphs spiking like sound waves. Our minds, she said, pointing. They've intertwined. His neural patterns adapt to mine to his, a harmony no protocol predicted. Like musicians in a duet, rewriting each other with every note. The hologram pulsed, mirroring their dance, their touch, their kiss, and Elliot felt exposed, raw, but proud. Velith's eyes narrowed, studying the data, her silence heavy. Elliot couldn't take it. He stepped up, voice shaking but steady. Look, I'm no scientist. I don't get half this stuff. Lattices, frequencies, whatever. But I know this. What we've got, it's not just data. It's a song, one the whole damn universe should hear. He swallowed, the words spilling out, rough and real. I was a nobody, a guy who couldn't write a hit to save his life. She changed that, changed me. Not because of some experiment, but because she saw me, and I see her. That's not a violation. It's a goddamn miracle. You want to erase that? Go ahead, but you're missing the point. Love's not a number you can crunch. It's bigger than your stars, your rules, all of it. The cave went still, his voice echoing off the crystals, raw and defiant. Velith tilted her head, her gold hair shifting like a comet's tail, and he braced for judgment. Lirien's hand brushed his, a quiet strength, and she spoke. He is right. This is not merely science. It is connection. Proof your alliance underestimates this world. Let us show you. Velith's gaze lingered, piercing, then softened, just a fraction. You stake much on this anomaly, she said, her voice less cold. She waved a hand, and the hologram faded. The data is compelling. Your resonance, it suggests potential. I will not erase it. Not yet. She turned to Lirien, decisive. You remain as envoy, Vara. Study this bond. Report its worth. The human stays, unaltered. But know this, the Alliance watches. Lirien nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Thank you, Arbiter. Velith stepped back, the portal flaring, and vanished, leaving the cave's glow to settle around them. Elliot exhaled, legs wobbling, and grinned at Lirien. We did it, he said, voice cracking. We're still here. She smiled, small but real, and squeezed his hand. We are. A year had spun by since the cave, since Velith's piercing gaze and the hum of a stolen data drive had changed everything. Dusthaven's desert sprawled beneath a twilight sky now, the dunes glowing soft purple as the sun dipped low, but Elliot Kane wasn't the same man who'd rolled into town in a rattling van. Tonight, he stood on a makeshift stage at the edge of town, a rickety platform of plywood and hope, strung with fairy lights that flickered like tiny stars. The crowd stretched before him, a sea of faces, locals, drifters, even a few wide-eyed tourists lured by whispers of his name. His guitar hung heavy across his chest. Its scratched wood warm under his fingers, and he strummed the opening chords of Starbound. The notes rolled out, clear and bold, cutting through the desert's hush like a beacon. The crowd erupted, cheers rising as he leaned into the mic, voice rough but alive. She came from a void with a silver glow, a melody I didn't know. The song was his story, their story, woven from the chaos of that first night, the soup, the dance, the cave's trembling light. He grinned mid-verse, pausing to wink at the front row. True story, folks. Dated a mysterious botanist once. She tried to cook toast, nearly burned my place down. Still the best breakfast I ever had. Laughter rippled through the crowd, bright and infectious, and he soaked it in, letting it fuel the next chord. This wasn't Reno, wasn't failure. This was home, and he'd found it because of her. Inside, he felt it click, purpose sharp and real. Lirien had given him more than a muse. She'd handed him a reason to play, to fight, to be. Every note of Starbound was a thank you, a love letter sung to the stars, and he poured himself into it, sweat beading on his brow as the final chorus soared. The applause hit like a wave, loud enough to shake the dunes, and he stepped back, breathless whole. He wasn't just a musician now. He was theirs and hers and his own. Their life had taken root on a hill overlooking Dusthaven, a low-slung house perched like a lookout post, its walls painted in sunset hues. Below, in a basement carved into the rock, Lirien's lab hummed, a secret world of glowing screens and curling plants, devices twinkling like constellations trapped underground. Elliot wandered down there sometimes, guitar in hand, watching her tinker with tech he'd never understand. One afternoon, he'd found her at a sleek piano, an Alliance gift, its keys shimmering like glass. Try it, he'd urged, and she had, her fingers hesitant at first, then fluid, pulling sounds from it like wind whispering through Altire's forests. He'd joined her, strumming along, their music blending, raw and earthy from him, ethereal and vast from her. We're a band now, he'd teased, and her laugh, rare and bright, had filled the room. They hosted strange guests, too. Envoys from the Alliance, drawn by Lirien's new role. A squid-like creature with ink-black eyes once floated in, its voice a bubbling hum. Another time, a luminous figure drifted through, shedding light like a living lamp. Elliot played host, cracking jokes over drinks, alien brews that fizzed on his tongue like soda gone rogue. Guess I'm the DJ of the universe now, he'd quipped, spinning a playlist of rock and jazz while Lirien translated his banter into clicks and pulses. The visitors stayed, fascinated, and he saw it, her dream taking shape, a bridge between worlds, with him at her side. That night, after the gig, they climbed the hill behind their house, the desert stretching vast and quiet below. The sky unfurled above, a tapestry of stars so dense it stole his breath, each pinprick a note in a song too big to play. Lirien stood beside him, her silver skin catching the light, her hand slipping into his. She pointed upward, her voice soft. "Altair," she said, nodding to a faint, steady glow near the horizon. "It is distant, but I see it clearly now." Her eyes shone, brighter than the star, and he felt the weight of it, her home, her past, and the life she'd chosen here. He squeezed her hand, turning to face her. "You're the melody I'll sing forever," he said, the words rough but true, spilling from a place he hadn't known he had. She stepped closer, her glow warming the space between them, and their lips met, a kiss slow and deep, like a note held until it filled the silence. The desert seemed to hum, the stars pulsing overhead, and he felt it, a harmony weaving them into the universe, a single chord resonating beyond the dunes. They pulled apart, foreheads touching, and he smiled, tasting her starlight on his lips. This was their beginning, under a sky that held them both.